What happens if an amateur like me hires one of the best professional coaches money can buy?
It's the best money I ever spent.
Will I PR in the marathon? Who knows? But today I did that, and we're going to interview that coach who just happens to be a 3-time world championship qualifier, a 209 marathoner who has a pro contract with Adidas, and really one of the most resilient US marathoners in the last 10 years. There's something in here for everyone, no matter what kind of runner you are. So hang tight, meet my new coach, and let's nerd out together.
Nerd alert. Nerd alert.
On this interview. There's so much good stuff. Can't wait for you guys to watch it. Let's get started. Reed, very good to see you today. We're going to start out very simple. I know you've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great coaches over your career, with Joan Hunter, with your coaches at Drake and your high school coaches. So I'm just wondering sort of what your sort of core philosophy is and how you approach the sport of running in the marathon.
Yeah, I feel like as a coach and as an athlete, like the biggest thing I've always looked for is the relational aspect of things. Like, I think as I've experienced in my own career, but also seen firsthand in the athletes I've worked with, I think you run your best and make your biggest kind of leaps in both training and in racing when you have like a very trusting relationship and the person who's sort of at the helm of the ship. And throughout high school, college, and now in my pro career, I've always been very conscious of like having a coach that I'm fully believing in. And I find that, when you believe in the coach, you believe in the training that they're giving you, and then you start to believe more and more in yourself. And that just creates this really nice, like, upward spiral that leads to success. And so for me, like the big thing that I find builds trust with again, the coaches that I've had in past and now as a coach working with athletes is just like being invested in somebody more than just a name on a list or splits on a watch or anything like that. So the big thing that we wanted to, we launched Hammer Knocks during COVID. And so part of our ethos as a brand has always been like connecting with athletes on a personal level, because we were born in a time where that's what a lot of people were really seeking, right? Like run clubs couldn't happen anymore. Group runs couldn't happen anymore. A lot of races couldn't happen anymore. So many people were seeking some form of like connection in their running. And so we were able to kind of step in and initially maybe fill in a little bit of the social gap that a lot of people turned to running for. And as a result, like that's just remained very much a priority. Yeah, to me, I think the biggest thing about my philosophy is just getting to know people, finding out what makes them tick, and then leveraging those things to help them get out of their own way and run as fast as they can.
You've run a 209 marathon. I think you've done 10 total marathons now. Tell me a little bit about your path to the marathon. A lot of folks back then weren't necessarily like finishing college and jumping straight into the marathon the way that you did. We're seeing that more and more now, like folks are maybe forgoing a long track career and just moving straight into the roads. But yeah, tell me a little bit about how you moved into becoming a marathon specialist.
Yeah, I kind of was a relatively rare breed. Like I debuted in the marathon at 23, I think. And it was at the Atlanta Olympic trials in 2020. So yeah, for me, it was sort of just like when I was recruited to run at Drake, my college coach, like the first day we sat down in his office, he, told me I was going to run the 10K on the track that spring. At the time, I'm fresh out of high school. The longest I've ever raced was 5K, and that felt like an eternity. And so I'm like, man, you want me to double up in my first year? And he was like, yeah, you're going to run the 10K. I would have you run the marathon if it were an event in D1 NCAA, but it's not. So we're going to run the longest distances you can. I feel like you're just going to be a guy who does better the longer the race gets. So from that conversation on, it just always felt like it was, a bit of an unavoidable date with destiny for me to get into the marathon. And so yeah, originally I'd planned to debut in 2019 in Chicago, which was about 6 months before the 2020 trials, and felt like good timing, relatively familiar, safe course for me as a Midwesterner. I knew the city well. It was easy travel from Denver and just kind of ticked all the right boxes going into Atlanta for me to get a bite at the apple before I shot at making an Olympic team. Got a stress fracture in my foot, which was like the only real injury I feel like I've ever had in my career. So not the best timing there. But then as a result, I had qualified for the marathon trials in 2020 through the half marathon. So I ended up still racing in Atlanta So that was my debut, and I maybe infamously fell twice in that race and was bleeding from the head, and ran like 2:25 and was hoping to run, about 15 minutes faster than that.
We'll
So
have to cue
I
the fall here.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, I like, equal parts jokingly and in all seriousness, to like think that debut was like the best thing that could have happened to me in my marathon career. Like, everyone in their head is like, yeah, I'm going to run my first marathon and I'm going to knock it out of the park. It's going to go super well. And it's going to be this heroic moment of success for me. And like, I ate a big old slice of physical and proverbial humble pie. I think it just really made me appreciate like how serious of a race the marathon is, and the level of commitment that it takes to train and race for it, and all that just really led me to want to try and figure it out more than maybe I would have if I just ran like a solid first one. And so then it was like a puzzle to solve. And I think most runners are very like committed people. So
you've done like 10 or 11 marathons now. And one of the reasons why I wanted to, why I was interested in having you coach me is just how resilient you have been and how you've been able over the years to sort of tackle a minute or two off of sort of each marathon. And I just found that really impressive that you've been able to sort of stay relevant and stay in sort of that top pack of US guys for so long. Can you speak to your sort of evolution and your journey over the years?
yeah, I mean, I do think, a lot of times in the marathon, you see like really big jumps initially, right? You go from your first to second, maybe your second, third, you're still shaving off minutes at a time. And then invariably you just sort of figure out the distance a bit more and start to approach, a little bit more of the training being dialed and mentally knowing how to get your head around the race itself and executing good strategy. So that learning curve definitely tends to plateau for most people, and certainly did for me as well. But I think to your point, right, like I've been able to sort of not plateau and stay. It's just slow and steady. And that's kind of been the story of my career, is very linear. I'm not the most talented in terms of like, a month out from taking a long break, you're not going to find me, looking like a gazelle on the track and running splits that nobody else in the pro scene could even fathom. I'm very much just a nose to the grindstone type of dude. I would rather approach things by stacking, week over week, over month, over year. And that's kind of what's led me to this point. And so, I think there's this sort of self-assuredness that kind of comes with staying healthy and generally progressing year over year, that you just start to take that almost for granted in a way. And it just becomes the assumption. It's like, well, yeah, I've always to a degree been improving. So why would this marathon or this year or this distance be any different?
So far I've copied, this is a copying series. I copied Clayton Young for a cycle, and then I've copied Jakob Ingebrigtsen, Jacob. What are some of the things that, an amateur can borrow from professional training? And then what are some things that you think they should absolutely not be copying?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is stuff that I feel like we kick the can around a lot on like my coaching calls, but also just like on the team, right? So I think the big thing that most non-pros shouldn't be taking away from pros is often like the intensity and the volume to a degree. I think when you look at a guy like Clayton or like me or like Jakob, like all of us, our biggest focus outside of like maybe our marriage and our children is our running. And so to that degree, like it becomes a very primary focus. Most people, if you threw a week or two of professional level volume and intensity at them, would probably be able to get through it. And then the other shoe would drop. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, now I'm either exhausted all the time, I'm hurt, or I'm being a neglectful spouse or father or wife or whatever the case may be. And that's where, as a pro, like you just sort of end up inevitably building your life a bit more around it. So I think that's what most folks maybe shouldn't take from pros. I think the big thing to take from pros is, oftentimes like we're leaving no stone unturned and really looking for like the next best thing, and I think that's been very prevalent in the last few years, especially as running's become more and more popular, right? Like the double threshold training that the Norwegian method has popularized is now, started with a guy like Jakob and then kind of fans out to more of the wider elite circles. And now feels like a lot of relatively, invested but not pro level runners are all focused on double threshold. And on the fueling side of the coin, that's a big thing too right now, that I feel like most, pros even when I was first starting the marathon, it was a very basic approach to fueling. It was like, okay, well, Eliud Kipchoge uses Morton, so I guess I'll use Morton. And now there's so many options. There's so many, you got Nomeo, you have bicarb becoming more and more of a factor in
I
marathoning.
swear, like not even that long ago, people were still using flat Coca-Cola.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yep. Yep. I know a guy who fueled with sweet tea in his first few marathons because he tried Morton and it didn't work. And he was like, well, I don't know what else I'll use. So I guess we'll go with sweet tea. So yeah, I think the recovery tools and sort of the training modalities of, like I can gut train instead of just run train. I can strength train instead of just run train. Like these things that can be pulled from the pro ranks and are pretty one-to-one, like are maybe taking more like 120 grams of carb per hour in a marathon. And maybe if you're a plus or minus 3-hour marathoner, that might do more harm than good, but you can scale that back and be like, okay, well, instead of taking 60 an hour, I could probably push up to 90, and that might make me feel a little stronger in that last 10K. So that's the kind of stuff that I think most people can look to pros to and be like, all right, this I can take on board, and just the legitimization of like, this is a good brand for me to put my money toward versus maybe this brand in the ever crowded supplement space or fueling space. The credibility piece that comes into play there is helpful for sure.
So we'll start a little bit high level before we get into specifics, but someone watching this series, what is something that you would hope they would learn about when they're training for their own marathon? And let's just say like your sort of average runner, your hobby jogger, maybe someone who's a serious hobby jogger like myself. What's something that you hope they take away from this series?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is like, whether it's, myself who does this for a living and I'm on my, the next one I run will be my 11th marathon, or someone who's like brand new to the sport and signed up for the marathon because it's kind of the fun, trendy thing to do at the moment, right? Like all of us, it's a big undertaking. And as I'm sure you will showcase quite well over the course of the build series, there's a certain level of sacrifice that comes with committing to a marathon, but it also is like, to a degree, I think the best gift that you can give yourself. Like, Christine, my wife, has ran one marathon and is planning to run her second this fall. And, I was very fortunate to be at the finish line when she finished in New York City on her debut. And just like the amount of, fulfillment and joy and pain and suffering and misery and happiness all kind of coalescing into one roughly 3-hour-ish moment for her is just such a special thing. My hope is that along the way, like we can showcase all of that for you, right? Like, yeah, there's going to be moments in the training where you're like, dude, I'm gassed. I'm running maybe 100-mile weeks for the first time in earnest, and my legs feel like lead all the time. And we're putting in, the 25-mile long runs with a bunch of quality in it. And, I'm going to be a zombie the rest of the day. But then also there's invariably also the days where you get out and you're just like, I don't know why I'm in the middle of a 100-mile week right now, but my legs feel poppy and I'm going to roll with it and have some fun and I'll have a smile on my face. And, I think it's again, to quote the GOAT Eliud, right? Like the marathon is life. Like to me, it's always been this very like emblematic encapsulation of to be a human is almost like distilled into running a marathon and training for a marathon. And so, yeah, I hope that comes through is just kind of the human element and the trials and tribulations and joys and successes of what the next, I suppose 6 months or so will bring for us.
So I think you're aware, like the goal is to run sub 236, or excuse me, sub 230 coming off of a 235 at CIM last year. What do you feel like are going to be sort of the hallmarks of training that are going to help move that nail and sort of take 6 minutes off of my time to be able to dip under 230? And then also for folks that maybe are, high 220s who are looking to dip under 220 or even get the Olympic trials qualifier time, what does that look like, and how do those differ?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's good questions. Like, obviously, most people are just going to have like a talent ceiling, and I think, like for myself, I'm probably pretty darn close to maximizing a lot of the things that I can maximize, right? Like I'm now 30. I'm kind of in the prime of my marathoning career. I don't have this advantage of like, oh, I'm still approaching my peak. And so
you don't have that Charles Hicks youth.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think it's important to be like, okay, where is my realistic ceiling, but also like ignore it at the same time. Like you can't put an internal governor on yourself and just be like, well, call it for me. Oh, 208's the best I could ever hope for in the marathon, because you just never really know until you hang up your shoes one day and you're done what your ceiling really is. And so, yeah, I think the big change for someone like yourself, who's sort of in this, like, want to make a big jump forward, but I'm already at a pretty darn quick marathon level. the big thing is consistency, right? Kind of how we started off on this call is I got to build over time. Rome wasn't built in a day kind of mindset, and all that then translates to, what we do on a micro level, day in and day out. It's got to be consistent, but also on a macro level of, week in, week out, month in, month out. All that has to really be pretty dialed. And that doesn't mean there's no room for, a day off when it's needed or something like that. But, it's being committed to the training block, and then certainly just increasing, right? Like the best way to get better at running is to run, and whether that's running faster, running more, or both, it's called practice for a reason, right? Like we practice running to get better at running. And so I think for someone like you, for sure, the next few months, as we've discussed, right, it's going to be about building the mileage up and building the workouts a little bigger, running more race specific stuff, but also weaving in some underpace stuff to keep race pace feeling comfortable. All that will be important. And yeah, as far as like a 218 to an OTQ, a lot of times, again, that might be a bit more of a talent ceiling. Like if you're already in the two teens, like finding that 2 minutes might feel like a bigger jump for a lot of people than it might for someone who's going from 3:30 to 3:25 in the marathon. But even still, again, I think they're more living in that pro space, and that's where most of the people like me are looking for maybe those marginal gains of maybe the bicarbs, or how can I tailor my fueling to be a bit more, give me more gas in the tank in the last 10K. So instead of bleeding maybe 30 seconds in the last handful of miles, I'm gaining 30 seconds back. And then that's a minute swing over a previous marathon. It's more that kind of stuff rather than, I don't think there's a whole lot of 218 marathoners who are running 50 miles a week and don't have a coach and don't really know what they're doing and have just stumbled into the sub elite realm. Most of us are already working pretty darn hard if you're in the two teens, for sure.
So knowing what you know now, like a lot of athletes will look back at their like college, high school careers. I'm just wondering if you look back, like, is there anything, knowing what you know about training, that you might change or have done differently in college or in high school?
Yeah, I mean, high school, I don't think I would change too much. I think the big thing as a teen is just like building a web for running more than anything else. And my coaches, I think, did an incredible job of that at Hopkins High School. Like they gave me the time I needed just to kind of come into my own. Like I was never, I was led to the water. I was never forced to drink. So I don't think there's a whole lot more I would change in high school, other than just maybe, if I organically had found myself being a bit more competitive a bit sooner, that might have been fun. But I wouldn't need the late bloomer effect that I had for maybe being burnt out by the time you graduate, and you're not as excited to run in college. Collegiately, same. I mean, I feel like I've always been a bit of a late bloomer, so it's easy to say now that I'm capable of running like 125 miles a week that I'm like, oh, I should have just ran more, should have built the mileage higher. But at the time, I probably still looked like most high school sophomores as a freshman or a sophomore in college. So developmentally, I was just a late bloomer, so I needed that time to sort of come into my own. And yeah, I remember having a conversation with my coach at college, coming off of a conference meet where, I was kind of in it at the bell and then just got my doors blown off. And, I've never been a super strong kicker. And I went into his office the week after and I was like, man, coach, like we got to change something. I'm just getting, I'm in the hunt and then we hit the bell and I'm just a non-factor. And he looked at me and he was like, well, would you rather stay at the level you're at, but be able to close a track race in a 56 and be on the podium in a conference race, or focus on building your engine, getting super strong, and maybe qualifying for NCAAs and finish like, 10th to 16th at NCAAs, maybe still not with the best kick in the world, but you're there versus, being a big fish in a small pond. You can maybe be a medium fish in a big pond. And I was like, all right, I guess you're right. And so to his credit, like he was always focused on the longer term approach and building me out over 4 years. And yeah, again, I stayed healthy all 4 years. I never redshirted at Drake. I was in and out in 4 and went from a 16-minute 5K guy in high school to a 13:45 guy by the time I graduated, and still hold the school record at Drake. And yeah, so that was definitely the right approach to his credit, for sure.
Right now, running is kind of having this boom. You're seeing all the run clubs are really popular and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if there's anything that just bugs the crap out of you right now. Are there anything that like folks are obsessing over that are spending maybe too much time on, or just what are the things that bug you right now?
No, that is a good question. Yeah, I mean, I feel like running is in this kind of like niche right now where it's so many people are finding it, which is incredible. That's stuff that we talk about on our Hammer Knock socials. Like, maybe before you spend $300 a month on the latest and greatest pair of super shoes, maybe hire a coach and have someone who can give you proper training rather than just pulling a training plan off the internet and hoping that it's good, or, you know, doing whatever your buddy's doing that day. Or like, I think the nuance of the actual training part is where people are going to make the most gains if they're new to the sport, way more than, yeah, investing in whatever the best lactic buffering supplement is of the day, or, you know, throwing $600 at a new GPS watch when they've got one that works. You know, it's I would say maybe the consumerism side of things is, and again, like, I get it, I'm also a shoe geek. Like, I can sit here and rattle off shoe specs to you all day, and I've generally got the latest and greatest because I have the privilege of getting a lot of that stuff for free. But yeah, for most people who are pretty new to the sport, I would say, you know, just find a training system that works well for you.
I think they say that like mileage is the best indicator of talent. So
Yeah.
it's the folks that are running more mileage. So just running more is what makes you faster. It's not going to be, there's no like shortcut for that.
Yep.
You just have to run.
Yep. Yeah. And that's it. You know, I totally get the sentiment of like, yeah, but if I can work less hard and run faster because I've got the shoes, then that sounds pretty attractive. And I, again, will never discredit that as someone who has the lightest shoes in the world at his disposal, right? Like, I'm very guilty of the, oh, well, the shoes aren't going to hurt kind of mindset too. But yeah, generally speaking, get out the door and run, and what's on your feet is a little bit less crucial. But you know, if you're someone who's starting to be like, all right, now let's look at where I can make some more marginal gains, or, you know, if it's a hobby that you're invested in enough, then yeah, of course, like, you're going to want to spend money to get the best product. And that's true of any hobby, whether it's running, cycling, rock climbing, camping, any and all of the above. Like, at some point you're just like, yeah, I'm invested in it, so I'm going to spend some money on it. So I don't discredit the consumerism aspect at all, but
Hey, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you. I told you we were gonna nerd out. A lot of exciting training coming up. This week I'm heading up to Magnolia Road for my long run. We've got some longer tempo sort of marathon efforts coming through. So we're actually getting into some tough training. So thanks for sticking along. Hang out for some of the next episodes, because we're getting into that marathon training and it's gonna be tough. But yeah, pumped to have some guidance this time around, and feeling really confident for that sub 230 goal at CIM. So if you haven't yet, like, subscribe, do the thing. God, I hate saying that, but do it, and I'll see you next time.